hello, Christine.
Hi, how are
How
you?
are you today?
Good, thank you. Actually, in really good spirits. Happy Labor Day.
Yes, happy Labor Day. Well, welcome to the show. So, what I typically do is ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a background about how you ended up here.
Okay. Well, thank you first off for inviting me to chat with you on this channel. I think you're amazing. Learned so much from you and just really blessed that we're collaborating in the way that we are. So a little bit of background on myself. I started out as an environmental planner. I have a master's in science, focused on forestry and international resource conservation. Um, Worked a number of years in the environmental planning field at the corporate level, and came to some aha moments during my years as a planner when we were, well, backtrack. As an environmental planner, we do a lot of impact analysis under the California Environmental Quality Act. And so I had several years of, field experience doing some, biological field studies and traffic and noise studies, what have you. And it always kind of, there was a disconnect with how we were analyzing our solid waste stream and particularly organic waste. And so after 8 years of working as a planner, I stepped out of that field to really focus on food waste as we were, sending it to landfills and hauling it, long distances and creating more impacts than we needed to manage for. So I stepped out of that role and really started focusing on food waste and organics about 14 years ago. So about 2009, 2010, and started my own consulting practice. At that time, compostable tableware was coming out on the market. And it was really just new. No one really knew what it was and, what kind of a product it was, but it certainly sounded really cool. Products disposable goods that you could throw in your backyard, and then nature will take its course and it will decompose and do its thing. But with my analytical mind and with that role, I figured, what, this is the cart before the horse scenario. This is a kind of a good product gone bad. Knowing what I knew in the environmental planning world, that we were, short statewide and nationwide composting facilities that would be able to handle this type of product. So that kind of lit the fire under me to really focus on how are we going to handle organics in the waste stream better than we currently were, particularly with this new product coming out on the market. So yeah, I kind of stepped out of corporate, started up my own consulting practice. And a pivotal moment or year was back in 2016 when we got picked up by the Rose Bowl Stadium. And it was that time they were going through some development changes and business development. They were bringing in partners to help them increase their revenue stream. And so they were considering, producing a number of music festivals on the turf grass on the adjacent golf course. And the light bulb went off in my head thinking, oh, okay, here's a good opportunity to really have an impact, help guide, this institution to follow some more sustainable practices. And they generate a lot of food waste and a lot of green waste. And more than likely, they were going to be turning to compostable tableware. So how are we going to manage all that? So that was pivotal. 2016, getting picked up by the Rose Bowl Stadium and then helping them with their organic
So how the heck did that happen? How did it get picked up? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we're here to talk about soils, but there is a whole closed loop component to it. So, in 2015, they had there was a scoping meeting, a public scoping meeting to discuss the environmental impact report that a consultant prepared to disclose what the impacts would be from bringing the music festivals to the Rose Bowl Stadium. And the concern was, well, they were going to site the music festivals, the operations on the golf course. And so when I attended, I'm looking through the document and I'm looking how the impacts were being analyzed. And of course, I look to water quality, I look to the soils section, I look to the solid waste section, and I'm expecting to see the impacts disclosed, right? And of course, I look at the air emissions section as well. There's about 16 different issue areas. And I knew at the time that any kind of activity or heavy traffic, foot traffic, vehicle traffic, large semis, bringing in heavy equipment was going to do some damage, on the turf grass. And any golf course is a major revenue generator for, any city. And so it was a green asset, to protect. But as compaction is a really big concern for the health of the soil and the biology that lives in it, because it can change, the conditions underground. It can make it go anaerobic, and then your beneficial microbes die off, and then they can't do the job of nutrient cycling. So knowing this, but obviously not being able to deliver that level of conversation, I was able to get in front of the COO at the time and just say, look, there's some concerns about this report, that it's not disclosing certain impacts, but this is what I, can suggest. And it really intrigued him. He was very sustainably minded. I had no idea what he knew from an environmental standpoint, but he seemed very eager to learn, eager to want to understand what it was that I was trying to convey, to say, look, you've got an asset you need to protect, and these impacts aren't being disclosed, but there is a way. There's still a way, to plan for the potential for these impacts if you start now. We also knew that the laws were coming down the pipes regarding the diversion of food waste from landfills. And I was already very well versed in the composting sector, or in the industry. So knowing what technology had existed already that could handle urban type feedstock, such as compostable tableware, food waste, and the grass clippings, green waste. So he liked that idea too. The technology, composting technologies. He's like, okay, well then you got to help us out. We're gonna bring you on, and you're gonna guide us. This is your forte. Do what you need to do. And so we had a good 8-year stint with the Rose Bowl Stadium. We pitched the different technologies that, if we can start with their operations and getting our feet wet with the recovery side, then we could start introducing the new technologies, testing them out, seeing which ones might be the best right fit, to get us to producing a product that they then could use in lieu of chemical fertilizers, to then come back full circle to treat the green assets that had the potential for being impacted by these music festivals. So he jumped on board with it, and the rest was history.
Wow. So that talk about like being at the right place at the right time with the right bait. You
Yeah.
had all three line up, and the next thing you knew, you were off to exploring technologies that could not only protect the facilities, because there's more than one,
Right.
but also enhance them. So
Right.
in many ways, regenerate, not just sustain, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So let's go down the rabbit hole of the technologies that you did look at while you were there.
Sure. Sure. So first and foremost, when we had the opportunity to present and share what our qualifications were, what our background was, what we were foreseeing in the future for them. At the time, we were borrowing technology and introducing technology from the agricultural sector.
Okay.
And what really stood out for me as an environmental analyst with a composting background, because I had gone through the U.S. Composting Council composter operator training courses to understand on an industrial scale, commercial scale, what's it going to take to actually manage large volumes of organic material. And there's a lot of different types of composting systems, from traditional windrows that's more low tech, but needing quite a bit of technology and machinery that just would not fly in an urban environment. And the vision was, to bring in a certain technology that would be a right or a good best fit, so that you can operate it within the heart of the city, so that you wouldn't have to haul the material away from the point of generation, because there you're getting into emissions from transportation. And then if you were ever to return the compost back, emissions related to that. And we pitched, the in-vessel continuous flow systems that are out there. And there's a handful of manufacturers that offer that technology, but they are mostly applicable, to dairy farms and larger ag cropland or crop producing operations. But again, with my environmental planning background and applying the skill set that I have, going down a checklist like we normally do for a CEQA analysis, I was seeing the connections like, wow, this really could not only take care of the compostable tableware that would come out in by the truckloads, but it would take care of the food scraps, it would take care of the green waste on site, um, and be able to produce a finished product that they could use on site. So we were working our way to that. But before, and I have to give the COO at the time, a ton of kudos, because I mean, that's his role. He knows operations. He knew to start, early on with dealing with, we've got to figure out these standard operating procedures first and foremost. How do you recover? How do you manage? How do you transport? How do you get everybody on board with a process, right? That you could just repeat. So that was phase one. Phase two was then now bringing in the smaller systems that were similar in nature as in vessel, to then pilot and figure out the standard ops on the back end of production. So how we were going to receive the materials, how we were going to process it. And then we needed to take the third phase of, how do we analyze the finished product? Would it be good enough for application? So the technology we kind of settled on was anything that was in vessel, that was going to be self-contained, right? From the time you input it to the time of discharge. And it needed to have, the capabilities of a continuous flow, because they were cutting grass, almost every day during the high season, right? During football season. The golf course, they're generating food waste every day at the restaurant, at the golf course. The large volume of food that's coming out of the events at the stadium. So we needed a continuous flow system. We started with an aerated static pile with forced aeration. That was our pilot. And that was meant to be temporary, again, just to kind of figure out what those standard operating procedures were going to be. Could we produce a finished product that was of quality with the feedstocks that was already available to us without having to import any from the outside? And once we got comfortable with that, then we kind of opened it up the next phase of, all right, let's bring in the smaller in-vessel technologies and see what they can do. And we learned over the course of, having 3 or 4 different types of machines, some claiming to be composters, adamantly, in fact, claiming to be composters, and some saying, no, they're just processors of food waste. Really beginning to understand the nuances between these types of technologies that were emerging at the time. This is now 5 years ago that they were coming out more on the market, and everybody's saying the same thing. It's the same sales pitch, but luckily we were already steeped into what we wanted, what kind of quality we wanted coming out of these machines. And that was extremely important for us. So in-vessel technology, some composters, some not. I guess I'll maybe pause there if you have a question.
Yeah, no, I actually have a couple. So let's clarify, this forced air composting, which is basically a windrow with a giant pipe in the bottom and it's blowing air through it, right?
Right.
I've played with a number of those over the years. My biggest complaint is that it just oxidizes the hell out of everything. And you just can't get, any kind of advanced biology in it, just due to the fact that you're pushing so much air and oxygen that literally destroys the organisms.
Yeah.
That it's problematic. And does it break stuff down? Well, yeah, it does. But it's like the best application I ever saw for that was Pacific Northwest, where they had a tremendous amount of fish carcasses. So we call them heads and racks. And there they mixed them with chips and they did this and it worked wonderfully. I think it had a lot to do with all of the excess meat, fat, omegas, and everything else that was in the fish that prevented everything from just completely dying. And so that was a technology that I too played with, but I just wanted to make sure the audience understands it so that they can tell the difference between the two. Now, in-vessel, on the other hand, there's a lot of different methodologies behind in-vessel. Everything from anaerobic digester to the ones that are like the cement mixers that add a lot of heat and turn it constantly. So just to clarify those are the 2 different methodologies that you played with. So what were the in-vessels that you did? Did you do AD?
No, we never did AD. I never wanted AD. I didn't want to waste what little budget that we had, because we wanted to focus on producing a live end product. And that was not bacterial dominated. I think it was 2019. 2019 is when I personally was doing my research around, healthy soils and what does healthy soil mean, and, how do you measure for healthy soils? And I just wasn't satisfied with the training that I had received and, from my composting classes. And I landed on the Soil Food Web School with Dr. Elaine Ingham, and taking the foundation courses really just landed there. It just opened up my eyes. And so AD was out because of that. We had to, produce as high quality of a compost as we possibly could. So AD was not going to give me the biological diversity. The second rung of equipment or machinery that we entertained, two of them were self-contained. You just load up and you push a button and the heating element comes on, the temperature gauge, LCD panel comes on and tells you, your temperature readings for what the heat element is and what the material is. And in 72 hours or less, you have a finished product that's, coming out the back end. Those were not AD because they were still in aerobic environments, but it was abundantly clear to me that having any kind of heating element in an in-vessel system that's going over 200 degrees, is going to kill off more than what we wanted, in biology. And we knew that handling an inert or bacterial dominated material more than once was going to start cutting into labor and operational costs. And we weren't going to have that superior material. So
I think, guys, I'm going to pause you there. What the hell is AD? Because I don't know it. So our audience probably doesn't either.
Anaerobic digestion.
You go for it.
So it's anaerobic digestion. So it's basically heating, cooking, and pulling off all of the gas. So they call it biogas, but in reality, it's methane. So it's super stinky. It's a super dirty form of methane. So you have a lot of problems with, like, if you're using it in cogen, so generating electricity, it just wreaks havoc on the equipment. That constantly going down, constantly needing to be cleaned. So it was humanity's first, maybe second iteration on how do we deal with these large scale, food waste specifically, whether it's carcasses, blood, or other relatively materials high in nitrogen that are going to stink real quick. And one of the things that we did learn early on in AD, that if you do have a protein base, that it wreaks havoc on the AD digestion process. So you can't use it for carcasses, for blood, some of these other biohazards. So hopefully that gets the audience to better understand these differences, and the next level of in-vessel digestions were more focused toward some of those biological problems, bloods, bones, carcasses, racks and heads, and so forth. So hopefully that gets the audience to understand the difference between in-vessel and anaerobic digestion in vessel. So they're basically similar.
I probably would like to add to that. One kind of analogy that I use to help people understand where anaerobic digestion facilities actually came from, and it's probably a very simplistic, way to put it, but I think it does help with understanding. So, in a landfill scenario, which is the crux of our latest legislation, SB 1383, which mandates the diversion of food scraps to landfills. Landfills are almost like a mega gigantic, full-blown scale plastic bag of trash that has a limited amount of oxygen in it, and then that is consumed by the biology that makes its way into that trash bag by way of food waste, because the biology lives on the surface of the organic material, whether it's green waste or food waste. And you tie off that big trash bag, right? You have just a little mid amount of oxygen left for those biology to survive. Once that's depleted, now you've created an anaerobic environment. Anaerobic meaning no oxygen or deprived or little. Landfills were built as dry tombs, right? They were never meant for organic living waste. And so we've created the byproduct of a landfill and the situation of sending food waste and green waste to landfill, it created the problem of methane emissions leaking out of these landfills. Even though they're supposed to be entombed, there's structurally, it gets compromised. And so you have this gas that is emitted, it's CH4. And it's carbon with 4 hydrogen atoms that gets leached out laterally and above to the airstream. So it's become, and CH4 methane is a major greenhouse gas emission, or a greenhouse gas pollutant, and they've said 28 to 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So ADs, in one sense, have been designed to actually capture methane. So it's kind of an engineered facility that models a landfill scenario. And they have packaged it to say, well, if you burn methane, it could be used for biofuel. So interchangeably, when you hear biofuel from AD facilities, it's equated to methane. That's the gas that they now are purposefully producing, because when you burn it for biofuel, it has less of an impact than burning fossil fuel. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, where the knowledge gap needs to close some more around this, because we need a whole bunch of energy for a growing population, right? We need fuel to fuel our cars and transportation sector. But what's lacking in understanding is that once we divert this organic material, the food waste, to AD, which seems to be the trend now, we have chosen to fuel the transportation sector and our energy sector versus diverting it to where SB 1383, the intent of SB 1383, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing methane. So that's it's an interesting space to be in. I mean, if you don't think that solid waste, climate change, and soils have anything to do with each other, they have everything to do with each other. So I really try my best whenever with my clients, with anybody that I speak to, is, AD is not the solution. It's not a closed loop system, but composting is, because this is what's going to sustain our agricultural sector. It's going to sustain our urban landscapes. It's going to help our trees be more resilient, because the soil, or the compost that we put back onto our urban soils, is reintroducing the biology that allows for that nutrient cycling to happen, to allow the trees to thrive, survive, and do their job of sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So it's a much more cyclical, sustainable than it is to send, our organics to anaerobic digesters.
Thank you for that. That was really well explained. Yeah,
I know. I'm sorry. I tend to do that.
No, that's good, because I personally just skip right over it, because it's not something that I will take into consideration. Now, I don't know about you, but probably 10 years ago, when things really started to pop in the AD world, I was getting samples sent to me left and right from people all over the country saying, "Hey, look at my new soil amendment, blah, 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 blah." And I'd look at it and be like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
It's black. It's smelly. It's like a nasty form of carbon.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of this? Is this like biochar? And
that was, I would equate it more to that. Yeah, absolutely. The material that was coming out of these machines that I helped negotiate, coming to the campus, I was like, this is more like charred organics, like putting a piece of toast into the toaster and you turned it up too high and it doesn't burst into flames, but it does get burnt and it's charred. And then you're like, oh, maybe I can salvage it. And then you kind of scrape it off. That's what's coming out of these machines. You've just cooked the heck out of the biology and now it's dead. And there was a term, I think one of your colleagues, Leighton, it was Trester. What's his name? Craig Trester. Necromass. Talk to me about Necromass. That I made a connection there. I'm like, this stuff is a necromass.
It really is, although necromass is more associated to like pieces and parts, everything from spores to leftover genetic material, DNA, RNA, organelles, inner and outer shell walls, all of the pieces and parts of the biology. Some of them will come back to life. Some of them will consume these pieces and parts so that they can then divide. And so it gives, necromass is a great way of explaining that it's a buffet for the biology, so that they have everything that they need to expand, to evolve, to horizontal gene transfer, some of the other more technical terms of, biological succession. So although the end result of AD could be considered biomass, or excuse me, necromass, it's really just carbon.
I think you're right. I would agree with you on that for sure. I mean, we did have the luxury, obviously we had this material, this digestate. And luckily we had a forest aerated static pile at our disposal, still in trial mode, pilot mode, but we were producing compost, and we were, testing it for biology, and we were pleased. There were some ins and outs with the system, like you were saying, it tends to oxidize the, dry out the bottom layers, that's really hard to get to re-moisturize and rehydrate. But this digestate, we're like, you know what? Let's test it. Let's take some of it and let's feed it to the biology that's in, a nice finished cured compost pile, and we'll test before and after. And I recall that I was pleased. I'm like, you know what? This actually helped increase the number of the biology, not just bacteria, but all the other protozoas. Yeah. And I think I can't remember the numbers, but of course we're looking for nematodes, and fungi, growth. I think we were going to continuously see an increase in our fungal biomass, just because of time. And we had so much woody material that we would add, but, it served a purpose for being a feedstock, but I chose not to recommend the systems because of the added labor that was involved. I had to direct and assign, our team members, to take that material and now move it over here and now incorporate it into the pile and then test it again before we were checking it off, saying, okay, this batch is good to go. It's good to apply. So I'm like, you know what? We really don't need this machine if we already are composting from the get-go. It was almost collect direct from the stadium, transport it to the composting system, load it, leave it, monitor it, test it, and then apply it. And that was what we ultimately settled on. And we were hoping for another phase where we would scale, and have an influx of, funds to be able to bring in the much larger systems that we knew, didn't have the heating elements in it. We knew that they were perfectly, aerobic from the time you input, from the time, of discharge. But yeah, it's just, it's still evolving, this field, but
yeah, and there are many different versions of AD. So
yeah,
I love your explanation of the bag, because that makes it very, very simple to understand. But even though some of those are heating because they want to break it down faster,
right?
Which again, we're not trying to turn organic materials into carbon,
right?
We want that carbon to be available for the regeneration of soils. And that's where
Right.
I gotta beach again. Stop saying sustainable. What you're doing is regenerative.
Regenerative. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's you're absolutely right. And that kind of plants the mindset of it's cyclical, right?
Closed loops.
It's closed loop. People still don't understand what closed loop means, but what it does plant an image in their minds, of thinking cyclical, closing the loop. And sadly, people think recycling is closing the loop. And if you don't understand the materials that you're purchasing, that you will ultimately end up throwing away, if you don't understand the origins of the material going into that product, then you either are sustaining a linear system or you're sustaining a closed loop system. So the terms are really, I think, important for us to be able to get right and really define. I'm blessed to be able to be in this space, and have these conversations, and particularly with you, Leighton, with how much so much about the biology. And I am really scratching the surface of this, but my mind always goes, as a planner, as an environmental planner, we're a master of we're generalist in everything, and not a master in all. And I've really realized how important environmental planners are, and we need more of them on these larger development projects to be able to speak to the different technical leads that are involved in these large scale public projects, and have these conversations around soils, not just geology and soils, but soils from a regenerative standpoint, and how it's interconnected with how we manage our urban water supply, how we manage for water quality, how we manage our local air sheds, in terms of cleaning our local air sheds and creating micro, climates. It's all interconnected. And I would just love to see more environmental planners at the table and talking about what we do. Because
you know what the issue is? It's not the environmental planners. It's the environmental planners that only look at geochemical.
Yeah,
that's the big nut to crack. And
don't
get me wrong, I'm into hey, you got to look at everything. You need to be respectful and responsible for what you're doing. You are skinning the earth. How are you going to put the skin back together so that it's functional and not dysfunctional?
Right.
And that's where environmental planners are crucial. The problem is that we had a guest 2 weeks ago, a gardener,
Gardner Scott.
Gardner Scott.
Last week.
He was like, well, I'm a gardener. And I'm like, halfway through it, I'm like, dude, you're not a gardener. You're an ecosystem builder. And that's where environmental planning needs to go. We need
I agree.
Here. We need wind screens here. We need to create a microclimate in this area. And that's kind of permaculture approach to large scale developments, because that would in turn begin to regenerate that area and provide shelter for more diverse organisms, which prevent that crop and pest pressure that happens in both agriculture as well as the urban environments, which I'm dying to go down that rabbit hole with you. But I think first we've got to finish up on the better understanding of some of the other steps that you went through. So you demonstrated 4 pieces of equipment.
We had the forced aerated static piles. That was great. We actually landed on, the Johnson-Su method. We called them silos, but they're chambers. We did a dehydrator. We brought in a dehydrator, which was, again, had a heating element component to it that just basically sucked out all the moisture. We had 2 contained in vessel. They called them biodigesters, which I really wanted to get away from using that terminology because it was misleading. And yeah, so that's 5 right there.
And how did the last 2 work?
I think I touched upon it. Like I said, both of them have a heating element to it, that I think you could crank up, over, 200 degrees. And then there was another temperature sensor that would measure the temps of the material itself that was being transformed.
Was it tumbling?
One was a internal tumbler, yes, and the other one had an internal auger that would had blades, and it would rotate, and it would move the material from the front end to the back end, and then discharged. And we really liked, the fact that they did exist, because they were able to be installed on the grounds, at the stadium, at the facility. We needed a much larger footprint regardless, because it only took in the food scraps. It couldn't handle, the wood chips or the grass clippings. And we needed a system that was going to take it all and have that capability, processing throughput. But both were very similar in their outputs. The first thing that I went to, and I told each of the vendors, I said, look, the output needs to be either comparable to the compost we were producing from the forced aerated static piles and the Johnson Sues, our modified version of the Johnson Sues, or better. Right. So I told them I'd be looking at it under the microscope. I want to see not just bacteria, because that's the last, we already know that it's going to be bacteria dominant. Right. But I want to see the protozoa, the amoebas, even ciliates I'll take, right. The flagellates at some point. Would love to see some actinobacteria, would love to see fungi, but in that short of processing time, we all know you're not going to see the fungi unless you're introducing the fungi on the organic material, the wood chips, right? So those were the last 2 that had very similar features. They both performed, right? They both took the materials, and they did what they purported to do, was reduce the volume from 100% to, maybe 20%, 80 to 90% volume reduction. Okay, that's really good. That's what a lot of operators in the city want to hear, is reduce the volume and reduce the weight so that you have less material to handle on the back end, and you might be able to sit on that material much longer and then save some money on hauling costs. So all of that totally makes sense from an operations and handling standpoint. But what lacks is the biology. So like I said, that's why we didn't recommend moving forward with those machines. And I think I was going to go back to, and I lost my train of thought, but first thing that my go-to is when you pick up samples, and I'm sure you do this too, Leighton, you take it and you just bring it to your nose, and you're like, what are you going to smell? Right? It's the smell test. You look at all the physical features first, right? Stuff that you can touch, feel, smell, look, and of course the color was way too dark, so it was charred. The smell was not right. It was either smelled of soy sauce or very like vinegar, or I wouldn't even say ammonia coming off, because again, there's little biology that's even anaerobic, and they're just getting burned. Or it was the smell of food, and then you do the squeeze test.
Like rotting food?
Not rotting. And it wasn't putrid, right? So I can't say that it wasn't displeasing, but when you know what you're looking for and you know what you're smelling for, And it's not that. It's not the earth smell, right? Or if you're going on a hike in a damp forest, and that smell if you go out in nature, and it's something else that's coming, like something out of a kitchen, right? Then it's off. That the biology is not there. Then you go into the physical attributes, right? You squeeze it, you release it. Does it retain its shape? Does it have the structure in it? Can it create that habitat, for the microbes that once you handle it and then you utilize it and you apply it to the ground, it's going to actually deliver on the features that you want for the plant, right? Because compost alone in a compost pile is not going to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, right? It's only going to do that in conjunction with a plant, right?
And biology. Yep.
And the biology. So there's it's not one or the other. It's a whole integrated system that one needs to understand in order to close the loop, right? And closing the loop is not recovering the food, getting it hauled away 90 miles to a composting facility, and then having that compost, that biology that was taken away from the site, and then get redistributed elsewhere. And the biology distributed elsewhere. Yep. Because the site where it originated from, the grass clippings, the yard waste, the tree trimmings that originated from that location is now being transported away, never to return. And even if it did return, how much of an impact are you continuously creating,
Yep.
Through that process?
What's the energy footprint? It's not pretty.
No.
So one other question, like when those two last pieces of equipment were operating, was there a odor? Was the ammonia present? What was that like?
Yeah. So yes, there was odor on both counts, and they weren't the same, which was weird. We did run the Solvita test on both of them. And obviously they're indicators of higher ammonia. So you have your anaerobic bacteria, at play, doing their job of transforming, consuming, the organic material and releasing their gases, right? Just like when we eat something undesirable and we're releasing gas, the bacteria is doing the same thing. It's just the undesirable kind, right? The beneficials don't do that. The beneficial microbes don't do that. So
no, they store the nitrogen. They don't turn it and volatilize it and turn it into either ammonia or methane.
And I thank you for clarifying that, because ammonia, right, is the gaseous form of nitrogen that's being lost. And that's so incredibly valuable for any on-site organic landscape treatment practice that anyone would want to, pursue if you're serious about, integrated pest management practices or the most sustainable landscape practice to practice. Ammonium is what is secured, right? It's what's the word? It's
volatilization?
No, that's ammonia. It's volatilized. I wouldn't even say sequestered, but nitrogen sequestered in the bodies of the biology, right? Yeah. So it's ammonia. It's available nitrogen in the form of ammonium. And when I taught, when I first started introducing the soil food web principles and concepts to our team of composters at the Rose Bowl Stadium, which in fact we recruited from the local community, one way I helped them kind of make that distinction between ammonia and ammonium is think of yummy donuts. You like the donuts. It's palatable. It's yummy, right? Ammonium. That's what the beneficial microbes want. That's underground, right? That's in the soil. The ammonia, it's like, oh, we lost it, to the air. It's volatilized. So you've got the anaerobes releasing the nitrogen and the beneficials holding on to it so that it could be released to the plants when it's time for it to be applied. So
exactly, or for division, because let's face it, they use a lot of different components in their own processes to develop and build biofilm, and there's a lot more going on in understanding how molecules are consumed, released, broken down by these biointensive processes of division, securing your own site,
right.
biofilm. So yeah, and I'm glad you made that point, because again, it's the solid version versus the gaseous version.
The gaseous, yeah.
You want to keep that stuff locked up in the soil.
That's right. And that's big language on big language for the soil food web, is the nitrogen's locked up in the bodies, of the biology. And we want to we want to expand on that diversity underground.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And then the key is the protozoa, because they consume it, but they release the ammonium plant available instead of releasing it in a gaseous form. So
right.
Why it's so important to store that nitrogen that is in that green waste or food waste that's available, and by heating it, gassing it off, you're losing all of that. Very valuable. And not just those, not just nitrogen. There's other compounds that are being volatilized and you lose.
I mean, just imagine the dollar signs, going up in the air when we're volatilizing the nitrogen in the form of ammonia, right?
We're burning $100 bills, man. Burning $100 bills.
Think about it blows my mind, how backwards our system is. We're spending millions of dollars on infrastructure for trying to produce, these soluble fertilizers, right? That are salts. They're all salts, right? And the money we're putting in to that industry, when the nitrogen is right where it needs to be.
It's free.
And it's free. And it's free. So there's a lot of other things kind of at play, as far as the industries that have an interest in continuing this unsustainable model of landscape management, right? And agricultural production that's not regenerative.
No,
and
it's all about the money.
It's all about the money. Yeah.
And the addiction, right? The addiction to it. And that's the insanity of humanity.
Yeah.
And you're so right. I mean, like, when I moved out here and I saw green bins, I was like, what's going on out here? And I saw like all of this organic material getting stripped off of these properties, thrown in bins and hauled away. And I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Seriously.
The education's not there, Leighton. We don't know what we don't know. And I mean, you're right. It's really unfortunate we don't know this.
What's even crazier is the terrain. So is the terrain. So
terrain. Okay.
So we have in California, you have two series of mountains. You have the coastal mountains and the inland mountains, and the Great Valley or the Central Valley in between. So everything west of the ocean mountain range is green as the day is long. It's plush, it's flush, it's stuff is just growing like crazy all the time. Mm-hmm. And all of that material gets ground up and then either landfilled or just dumped because there's no market for it. What really needs to happen is that needs to go over the mountains into the valley where they have no organic matter left in their soils from intensive farming. And you know this as well as I do, is that when you feed a plant a nitrate-based fertilizer, the bacteria need the carbon to break that nitrate form into an available for the plant. So by fertilizing it, you're frying the carbon even more.
Yeah,
By
that's right.
release, you're oxidizing it. So you're just in this downward like shit loop that's going nowhere. It's a downward spiral.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you shift those gears? Like, hey, over here in our state, over here we have all of this stuff that we're wasting, and over there they have all this stuff the stuff that we have they need. So where's the friggin' common sense amongst these politicians and system engineers, as far as like for very affordable way to handle this instead of just dumping it or burning it. And that's where I literally went crazy the first year I was here, thinking about, well, I even talked to Eric Wobrowski about this. Like, why don't we build a fleet of these trucks? Everybody, we put a Johnson Sue. We call it a bioreactor. Okay,
there you go. Yeah.
A cylinder
Bioreactor
in the back of everybody's house. No green waste leaves their property. Everything gets either composted and spread in bushes, composted and liquefied as a fertilizer.
Agreed.
And now you could reduce the cost of hauling. You could reduce the energy footprint of handling this stuff. I mean, the volumes. I mean, you've seen the equipment. You've seen Agromans.
Yeah.
It's insane the amount of energy that they have to expend just to handle the volume. Not even talking about getting it from here to the place where they're handling it.
Right.
So that's something that, Christina, when I first got out of soil food web school, my dream was, why don't I set up a reactor on everybody's property, drive around in my little truck like a milk truck, take the stuff, process it, apply
and
it.
Leave it.
I mean, that's what nature does.
Yeah, you could go around on a bicycle, and not even go around in a van, and I mean, we already do this on a very small scale for a few clients of ours, in Pasadena, and they're the early adopters, obviously, right? But and we haven't cracked the code on how to get the knowledge that you have, the knowledge I have around this into the mainstream. And, we thought, that we had a good model, at the Rose Bowl where, we were working with the school district, right, to recruit their students, and they could, get some, work experience, and then we'd have an audience, that we could introduce the soil food web principles to and teach them about sustainable waste management practices. They could learn the problems of waste generation all the way to how do you manage, the organics, from a regenerative standpoint, right? Because it was all contained all on one campus. And I still believe that is an effective model. And I'm trying to be positive here, right? Because there's more money coming down the pipes from our state government, like California Department of Fish and Game, or Fish and Agriculture, Food and Agriculture, from the federal government, USDA, from the EPA. They're now putting more money, into these types of programs. And if there's, I would just love to see everybody incorporate an educational and workforce development job training component to it, right?
Well, that's called the circle economy.
Yeah, right.
And it's desperately needed at this point in time. Because the jobs are going away. Yeah. Any way you look at it.
AI is taken over, but AI can't take over composting. And they can't, they just can't. And we would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we entertained that, because if we did, we would be losing out on another extremely important element that's more personal in nature than professional for me. And that's the spiritual connection, to our existence. right? We have so much to learn from the soil because of Dr. Elaine Ingham's work and what life is underground, that we can tie back to soil science. We can tie back to soil microbiology. And there's so many analogies we can draw that will help us make sense of our own existence and our role in it, right? We exist above ground, very similar to the life underground that Dr. Elaine Ingham has so eloquently educated us all on, right?
Christine,
And
I think it's deeper.
yeah.
I used to ask people, one of my favorite questions was, where does the soil end and the plant begin? All right. So
First, the chicken or the egg?
Right? Well, the chicken and the egg, I got it. I got that one. I figured it out. All right. So the chicken and the egg came first, but it came from a different species of bird.
Ah.
All right. So evolution, right?
Yeah.
So
There you
evolutionary, there's always a quirk. I mean, where'd the fucking giraffe come from?
That's true.
Well, where did giraffe come from?
That's good. That's good.
The hippopotamus, the platypus, right? What the fuck is a platypus? Right?
What's their function?
Total freak of nature, right? So the egg came first as far as the chicken's concerned, but not to get too far off track. But
we were talking about education and the gap, and how can we crack the code of bringing our next generation up in this mindset and knowledge, right? Because they're the ones who are going to make the difference. They're the ones, once they know this material, they're going to need to, now the next step is engage civilly, like do civic engagement to get the leaders who are making decisions to understand that even if they didn't understand the premise or the science, that they would entrust that the younger generation actually learned it and now are delivering on it, and that they need to be paid attention to.
and where that goes back to is just like what you were beginning to talk about, is that connection to the soil. Because as below, above.
Yeah.
So we all come from the soil. We all go back to the soil.
Yes.
So that intimate connection that has been taken away from us through busyness at work, vehicles, shoes, not gardening, not having dirty fingernails. All of that stuff is perpetuated the illnesses within all of us because we're not connected anymore. So, it's a big, big piece of the puzzle. But as the walls, the financial kingdom crumbles, which it's going to, more and more people are going to be forced to be like, well, I can't afford to buy groceries. I'm going to have to grow them, or I'm going to have to convince my neighbor to grow them, and I'll paint my neighbor's house. Or neighbor's, this green circle economy where the almighty dollar has no value. Yeah, because our time is the value.
Yeah,
we're burning our time to earn these dollar bills that are getting less and less valuable. Sooner or later, the pendulum's going to drop and swing the other way. And when it does, that's where the awareness is going to take a foothold and force the change. I'm a firm believer. That's why I do these damn podcasts. Is so that
that's your role. That's what your contribution of your life, purpose is doing this podcast along with Ken. And I wanted to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying about life in the soil. Like our younger generation who are they're 16, 17, 18 years old. Those are really important years because they're beginning to reflect. And if they understood, how the soil works and life underground, I think it would help them understand their own existence better, right?
Spirituality, the connection,
right, and be more intentional and be more mindful about the direction that they hope to take in life. Where even if they go down the financial, management, asset, management route, right, they'll still have some sense of existence, beyond just the human world, right? And the earlier we can get this education and training into our younger kids, I think the better they're going to be off, mentally, for their mental state of mind, and just being more mindful individuals. I mean, I think there's just been a whole generation that has been completely clueless and mindless about, how they live their lives. It's on that rat race. Yeah, that's not helping.
That's it.
Unless you've been trained mindfully how to use those devices and how your brain works, right? So yeah, that's a whole nother topic too, right?
Yes. It's about de-evolution versus evolution. And
Yeah.
that whole model of creating robot humans instead of letting creative energies flow to elevate the entire species. That goes back to control and money. But we can go down that rabbit hole another day.
Yeah.
But let's reel it back in. So we've identified the 5 different types of equipment that you use. You've identified how they vary and differ in both.
Oh, there's one more.
Oh, okay. What's the last
one more? I forgot. The brewer. We brought in a brewer.
Okay.
Right? So that was kind of the last stage in our trials, right? In order to then confidently say, okay, now we've got the standard ops from start to finish. And the finish line would have been applying it, at scale, producing at scale the material you needed in order to brew what I've been calling liquid compost, right? Extracting the biology that's from the solid form into a liquid solution that is way more easy to apply at scale on 190 acres. Now, we didn't get that far, just some circumstances, but we did have a brewer on site, and we were able to test the solution on a couple of different areas on campus, one being the golf course, the inside the stadium on the football field, and then on the soccer fields outside, area H outside of the stadium. And we had some good results. And our objective was to prove to the groundskeeper that we weren't going to damage the turf grass. That's honestly, if I could pull that off, with the end product, then hopefully that would have elevated, people's confidence, right, in taking the next big step and converting, going through the conversion at scale. And I think our best results were from the football field, where, okay, yeah, after 4 weeks of applying it weekly, grounds, it looked aesthetically better, if not equivalent to areas that were treated with the chemical, synthetic fertilizer. But it was the below ground data, when we measured all the root depth, that was most telling, right? That was probably more of interest to myself and my team and to Dr. Ingham than it was for the groundskeeper, because obviously they're mostly concerned with presentation and appeal and how green is it going to be, and all of that. But every time you have root depth growth, you're improving structure, you're improving infiltration rates, you're improving aeration, you're just improving soil health overall. So that was a plus.
And don't forget the wear and tear.
And the wear and tear.
The roots, the less they get torn up.
Exactly. And that was the evidence and data that we needed in order to go in front of the powers that be and say, look, now we have it. Now we've closed the loop. Now it's on, it's decision-making time. Do you want to move forward with it? Because now you have even more events that are approved for activations or just being produced on the golf course. And with the tens of thousands of cars being parked on the golf course. Again, going back to compaction from the initial conversations we had back in 2015, 2016, the solution, the liquid solution, was going to be the solution for helping address the compaction issue that they were going to be more and more up against. And there's one more piece to this puzzle, that if they didn't continue on, then their only remedy, to bring back the usability or playability of the grounds after a large event, how do you treat it? What's the tried and true way of addressing compaction on turf grass?
It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. You either crank up the irrigation and water, right? Or you douse it again with some synthetics so that you have an immediate response and it goes green. But then this goes back to your statement around our arable lands that are no longer arable because we just keep killing off the biology with the soluble nitrates, right? And no organic matter. They had two trajectories they could go on. Do that like they always had and dismiss, this new trajectory, or go on the new trajectory and invest in that. So that's we got it to that point of saying you don't need to fear. We've got a solution for your compaction, your potential compaction problems. But again, and then there's water quality along with that, right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
The more compaction you have, and the more synthetics you add to it, and the more water you add to it, you don't have infiltration going on. Guess where that?
More pollution.
It's running off into the Arroyo Seco.
Yep. Amen.
And none of it's disclosed in any of the environmental impacts in the environmental documents I've seen. And yeah, it's really, really unfortunate. So we're back at square one.
Have you ever seen a golf course that went out of business?
Have I? No, I haven't.
If you did, you would see exactly what you're talking about. A complete apocalypse of the plant life, where no matter how much fertilizer they throw on it, it's dead. It's burnt. It's cooked. It can't come back. It's just it's time to bulldoze the whole thing and start over. And generally, what happens to those golf courses is they go bankrupt.
Right.
People walk away, and the land just sits there fallow until a developer comes along and says, "Oh, I'm going to build a whole bunch of houses here." But what is amazing, after about 5 years, when they do come back, they're friggin' gorgeous. Because now all of a sudden the weeds or the indicator plants come in, because there's no way the grass can come back, and they start regenerating the soil. And within 3 to 5 years, it becomes an oasis, a natural oasis. So we know we can fix shit. The problem is that, how do you prevent that complete apocalypse from happening? And this, in many ways, is these practices that we're talking about right now. Is, you can deep tine it and then put a compost extract in, a top dress with some sand and some biologically complete compost. Now you've decompacted within a matter of months, and you're not going to have lateral movement. You're not going to have leach organic forms of nitrogen and other compounds, because they'll move with the water. But once they're bound up on a CEC site, they're stable. They're not going to disappear. So now back to the brewer. What were you brewing? You weren't putting food waste in there, were you?
No, we were just doing extracts.
So from the compost that we made.
Yeah, we had the BioComplete compost, or at least we had quality compost that had all of the major, taxonomic, trophic levels of biology in there, and we're just extracting it out. and making the brews that way. So that was exciting. That was really cool. We did do some applications at the beginning of the year, 2023, I think it was, on the golf course, wee hours of the morning. The superintendent there at the time was really gung-ho about, trying new things, and really made himself available. But he still pushed back, on occasion. We had the conversation was interesting, because he kept asking typical questions within the synthetic fertilizer space.
Yeah, what's
He asked questions from that didn't apply in the biological world, right? Yep. So he would, and it was just such a hard conversation to get past, to say, look, I understand what you're asking, and you want these clear-cut, answer around, well, how many pounds of, nitrogen per, acre do I need to apply of your extract? And I'm like, doesn't quite work that way. Different questioning. And I think, Leighton, we talked about this before, and you had a way to pivot.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So share that. I forget how you do it.
So the conversation is, Leighton, what's the NPK value? Right? How many pounds of nitrogen am I going to be releasing with your concoction? And I say, well, I think you're approaching it wrong. I think you need to look at it as CNPK. So carbon, nitrogen, potassium, or phosphate and potassium. And that always sparks the first, like, what do you mean carbon? And I'm like, okay. Just so you understand, when you use a synthetic fertilizer, whether it's an ammonium or a nitrate, in ammonium, you're going to be burning more water because the organisms, the bacteria, need the water as an energy source to break the ammonia up so that it can be plant available. So that means you're going to water more. Or if you're going to be using more nitrate-based fertilizer, you're going to be burning carbon because they need the carbon as an energy source to break it. So what's your carbon? What is your carbon storage here? And then they go, oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay, all right, cool. So you understand the importance of carbon when you're using NPK loosely, right? And they'll be like, yeah, okay, I'm here, I'm listening.
He's tracking.
Yeah, I'm listening. Okay, so then let me ask you an even better question. What is the pre-NPK plus biology release of pounds of nitrogen per acre? And then they're like, well, what do you mean pre-NPK? Dude, before NPK, before they invented that stuff, what was the pounds of nitrogen being released pre-NPK plus biology? I have no idea. Well, how healthy was the planet? Oh, yeah, it was pretty healthy, right? We didn't need this shit for hundreds of thousands of years. We didn't need this shit. So the real answer to your question is, what is my nutrient cycling value pre-NPK? And that's when I go, okay, that's easy. Now I can explain. Now I can talk to you in your language. So your NPK release per acre over a 90-day period based on the protozoa that you have. If you have 200,000 protozoa per unigram of soil, you're going to be releasing 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre over a 90-day period. How much nitrogen do you use now? Oh, we use a fraction of that.
Wow.
Okay, so you're using a fraction of that, and I can give you something that you don't even have to use any, and you're not going to have to use any pesticides whatsoever, because you're not going to need herbicides, because your grass is going to be so fungally competitive that nothing else can survive. Those weeds or indicator plants that you hate, they can't survive. They can't pop up in the environment. And so you're going to be saving on your NPK. You're going to be saving on all of your synthetic pesticides. So how are you doing? How does that sound? And they're like, well, that sounds pretty good.
I wish I could deliver the way that you did. I wish I knew you back then. I would have brought you in to.
So it's real simple. It's like, What's the NPK? Well, okay, let me ask you a question. What's the CNPK?
What's the CNPK? And then it opens up their line of questioning. Like,
Right.
what
And
do
then
you
they're like,
mean?
well, what do you mean by C? And you go, well, C is needed to break down N.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
don't have enough N, or you don't have enough C, your N is not being picked up by your plant, which means you have to use more.
Yeah.
And it's a never-ending cycle of more.
Yeah.
Right.
And I like how you said if it's you're using more water with
ammonia.
Based.
Ammonium based is water. Nitrate based is carbon. And
nitrate based is carbon.
Yeah. There's
so I wanted to share or kind of go back to the golf courses and which ones go under. I didn't know, but if you know of any specific golf courses that have been revived, please share them with me. The reason why I'm asking is because I'm a member of the Association of Compost Producers here in California. It's the state chapter for the U.S. Composting Council, and we are putting on a webinar that we're trying to curate, these case studies of urban spaces, primarily parks and recreational facilities, with turf grass that they need to manage, curate those case studies that have made the transition to biological inputs and management practices. And so if you have, a site in mind, share with me offline, because we'd love to showcase them. We're trying to get a hold of, there is a golf course that I know went down this route of converting from synthetics to biological inputs and doing the compost teas and extracts on a regular, consistent basis. And we're hoping to get him on the webinar. But this is McInnes Golf Course up in Palo Alto, I believe. And they were forced to make the transition more than 10 years ago, I think it is now, because of a water quality issue. The Regional Water Quality Control Board gave them notice that they needed to stop using chemical fertilizers because they were able to trace the pollutants from the bay back to the golf course.
Is that the one in San Francisco?
Mm-hmm.
And they're using Korean natural farming.
I don't know. He didn't bring that up, but I know that he worked with the Soil Food Web folks, so Dr. Elaine Ingham, years ago.
Okay,
and
so this
he was just forced to do it, not because it was an aha moment for him and he's trying to convince his boss, to do it. I think his boss was let go because he's like, there's no other way to do it. And then it landed in his lap and he had to go and figure it out. And he also landed at the doorstep of the Soil Food Web and Dr. Elaine Ingham.
So I'm wondering if it's the same guy that I had a celebrity brush, for lack of better words, with at one of the conferences that I put on. And he invited us down. It was up in Humboldt, and he invited us down after the conference down to San Francisco to visit his golf course, which was right in the wetlands. And so this may be different.
No, it could be, because I know there is a wetland area, protected area, that there's a lot. I found more on the wetlands, like their mitigation, conservation plan, than I found on McInnes Golf Course.
So reach out to the person and see if they're using natural farming or Korean natural farming as well as methodologies. Because if it's the same guy, it'd be great to catch up with him. I lost track of him probably 5 years ago. But I was really impressed.
You don't remember his name?
No. Kristen, I meet too many people.
That is true. Yeah, you're one of those guys that knows everybody.
Way too many names in my head.
It's all good.
But yeah, that would be interesting to reconnect with him, because he had made some really great strides or steps forward and we toured the course. It was, he had some spots. He had fairy ring and a little bit of weed pressure, but that's common in any golf course. I mean, that's when you go out and just start fungiciding and nuking.
Right.
with herbicides, and he didn't have to do that. So, and the players didn't have to be subject to it.
No, and that's another if we can another sidebar here is the solution, to synthetic fertilizers for it, and the solution to synthetic turf grass, right? I mean, I'm learning and being pulled into these conversations now around the popularity and the misperception of artificial turf grass as a sustainable product. And yet it's anything but. And yet, I mean, the industry has gotten a foothold, and there's a different knowledge or different, there's misinformation being shared to the general public, to turf grass grower, or not turf grass growers, but operators of recreational facilities, right? They don't know the science. All they are sold on is, you mentioned weed suppression, right? Okay, sure. If you put down an unbreathable fabric, that simulates the look of grass, okay, you won't have, you'll suppress the weeds. Okay, but that's artificial. But it doesn't, I mean, it's way much more detrimental to the environment, but also to humans above ground because of the toxicity, the disposal factor, the leaching, like all of it just absolutely makes no sense to install this type of material when you have an existing solution, which is natural turf grass coupled with a natural amendment, compost. If people only knew that was the solution, it's not just natural turf for natural turf's sake. It has to be a hybrid and integrated with an organics landscape treatment methodology.
Agreed. But the only problem is we don't control the conventions. We don't control the lunch and learns. We don't control the money in the markets and the information, the advertising and the bombarding of this misinformation to these people that are, hey, they just want to make their money. I have to make this decision. I have to make the decision between natural turf.
It's a huge liability now. Like that's a track that I see. Like, again, I'm now coming at this from an environmental planning perspective. It always kicks in for me when I'm thinking impacts. It's not just environmental impacts, but it's socioeconomic impacts, it's health impacts. Mm-hmm. And granted, now it's all interconnected, right? You can't disclose environmental impacts without disclosing health impacts. And there's a huge liability factor, in my opinion, and I would love to have a conversation with an insurance carrier, of, a stadium or, a municipal park, to say, look, have you considered the liability of backing artificial turf, for a public project where they're investing public dollars into a project that's installing artificial turf because of the health and risk factor of artificial turf, the compaction, just the injury from falling on that type of surface compared to natural turf, which is less compacted. It has more absorption, potential. The chemicals that do, have the potential to leach off, the heat island effect that these artificial turf creates, that natural turf would logically cool the microclimate, the local airshed. It just, the liability here is something that I don't think people are talking about. And if they did, then they would naturally, I would hope, ask the question, well, what's the alternative? And then naturally, the composters and the natural turf grass growers could easily fall in line and say, well, we're the solution here. We've always been the solution.
Yeah, we just don't have the money and the lobbyists to get your attention.
Yeah.
So maybe you just figured out a way to do it, which is to go to the insurance companies and literally say to them, all right, go to the parks department. Who's insuring your turf fields or your conversion?
Yeah.
And they'll
I
say,
just I just concern myself, like I'm not siloed enough, as an environmental planner, clearly, I have to research these other branches, that impact the environment. And so that's what took me down the soil food web route. I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Okay, I can see the interconnectedness here. Let's look at, the liability factor, how is this going to play out, for my clients, right? Let's have this conversation. Let's be bold enough to have this conversation and explore this. Because at the end of the day, it's dollars and cents. Do you have it budgeted for a consultant to help you, have these conversations that are more long-term and strategic in nature, where if you invest now in planning, then you'll save, over in 5 years from now on your insurance, your liability, your water, your chemical inputs, your hauling costs, right? That's where, as a consultant, we're well poised to help our clients. And if we don't have these hard conversations, then we're not doing our job, and we can't deliver our recommendations with full integrity if we ourselves haven't researched these topics and bring forth the concerns. And it's not all about just environment. It's about people, and it's about cost effectiveness. Because our clients could be shooting themselves in the foot if they don't do it otherwise.
So maybe in the conversation that we've had prior to this conversation, obviously, about that potential client, maybe that's the answer, is to go back to them and say, hey, who's going to insure this field? And then go to the insurer and say, hey, do you guys ever look at this liability? Like, your people get a skin burn from sliding on this turf, and they get a blood infection, and they come back to you and say, your field caused my blood infection. I'm going to sue you for X for my health. Is that even on your, your mitigation side, your risk side?
Right.
And if they say no, then you say, well, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
You heard about ACLs. You heard about knee, joints, all of these things that happen when you impact this.
Right. The number of concussions that could from field, like goalies, that are constantly diving and going after the balls and landing on their shoulders. I mean, this is such an evolving topic, if
you open that door, then that insurer, once you've converted them to start thinking about their risk mitigation on this type of job, then you can say, hey, who else at your level is doing this type of work? Because I'm here to help them, prevent them from having unnecessary risk management or balances on your sheets. Because by default, I'm helping to fix a problem, both in food waste, soil health, in all of these other areas.
Right.
And so then all of a sudden, next thing you know, you get invited to be a keynote speaker at an upcoming insurance conference, and now you just blew the fucking lid off of it. Because seriously, Christina, this is the hardest thing in the world. When I first got out of Rodale, I was friggin' on fire. I mean, I was attacking everything, working my ass off, doing jobs for free, left and right, just trying to explain to people, like, hey, I come in, I treat your property 3 times, maybe 4 times if necessary over the course of 1 or 2 years, and then I'm gone. I have an anti-business plan. You're never going to have to spend as much money in cutting the grass because you're not over fertilizing it. So you're going to save money on
that's right. Cutting, that's right.
Save money
or even aerating, spending money on aeration.
All of those things. Thatching.
You could save money there on fuel, on labor costs, if you cut out just aeration.
All of those expenses, right? So, but when I explain this to people, it was the whole concept of, well, just because I'm going to save money in the future doesn't mean I'm going to spend more now. And I'm like, I'm not that much more expensive. Like, those fertilizer companies should be paying you to get rid of their toxic waste.
Yeah.
And then I get angry and frustrated. And then they're like, oh God, this guy's crazy. He's a lunatic. He's going to go off the walls or off the rails. But that was the frustrating part of all of this, was like,
Yeah.
people forget a penny saved is a penny earned.
Yeah.
Right. And that, yeah, in 2 years, the amount of money you would have saved if you had done this program would be a lot, significantly more than you've actually sat down and thought about. Yeah. And so, but if you attack it from the other side, the insurance, there you go, man. I really think that you, in many ways, have created an idea that should be focused on, and it starts with one person, one friggin' field. The one conversion that you prevent from happening, you go back to the insurance company and you start bringing this kind of conversations to the table, and they'll be like, "Oh wow, that's significance. That is a real liability that we did not take into consideration."
Yeah, it's not easy being the messenger,
no.
Right?
It's called first one through the gate gets bloody. I believe. I'm bloody as fuck.
I've experienced that, taking it with a grain of salt, but we've got to keep plugging on and targeting, the right audience. But I also think it has to do with diversity in everything. Diversify your financial portfolio. It's that makes as much sense in our industry. Diversify your options, diversify your strategies as much as you can. It's not one size fits all. It'll never be one technology fits all. And I think coming at it from that perspective, it's not going to be one audience or one tactic. It has to be all. Right. We have to not attack. But we do need to, have good rapport with our school administrators, our leaders at that level, at the K through 12 level, at the community college level, with our institutions, with our city council members. I mean, we've got to cross over into the different sectors and be able to talk the talk their way. Right. And I still have to learn that, but not to give up hope. And so I'm grateful to you, Leighton, for what you do and how you do it. And again, for this show. So,
well, thank you. And we're going to have you back on, because we didn't even get a chance to talk about ecosphere sciences. We didn't get to talk about all the work that you've been doing, all the schools that you're summoning. We didn't get to talk about Steve Weinbrandt. So there's a lot more of a conversation that needs to continue. But because Ken popped in, obviously we've got to deal with questions, because we're running out of time, I think.
Okay.
Well, I think Christine needs to go fairly soon, so I wanted to get the questions out before she needed to run. Perpetual has two, actually. Stadium mowing. How does Christine compost grass? That we do anaerobic and superheat instantly.
We do it gradually. We use the grass clippings in the beginning as our pilot, our high nitrogen input. And again, everything was more on a pilot level to figure out the process, on how would we recover it, deliver it, manage it, input it. So it was our high nitrogen. We would add it. I think it was at 10%, of the recipe. We brought in wood chips that were from the grounds. We had that readily available to us. And to prevent it from going anaerobic, we used the forced aeration. So the piping was installed. We had it on a variable frequency timer. We would monitor it regularly for heat. We would irrigate it regularly, water the piles where we needed to. If there were hot pockets, we would either manually aerate from above or crank up the blower just to maintain the right temps. So we were very strategic in how much of that grass clippings we would use. I hope that answers your question.
So there's two options, Perpetual. One is as soon as the grass is cut, you blend it with browns, as much browns as you can. 10%, that's or 90% browns to 10% greens. In my mind's a little heavy. You can calm that stuff down with pretty much 50-50 browns to greens.
We would add the food scraps into it as well.
So you had other nitrogen sources, but for just grass clippings or anything, like if you sickle a meadow down, you're going to want to mix that stuff with browns immediately or dry. One or the other. If you let it clump up, it turns black in the middle. It gets all anaerobic and nasty. Yep. So you either use it immediately or dry it. One of the
Absolutely. Other. Yep.
Perfect answer. So his other question is, how do you remedy compacted peat soils like we have here?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, typically peat doesn't compact unless it's gone dried out. So if it's a bog that somebody harvested and never finished the job, or somebody's downstream or the hydrology starts screwing around with draining that land, then that stuff will become both hydrophilic and compacted. But a healthy peat bog, you could just stick your hands down in there, no problem. So how would you deal with decompacting a peat bog? Well, how deep is the peat, right? A lot of peat bogs can be 30, 40, 50, 100 feet deep. So you're definitely not going to be able to decompact down 100 feet. So generally speaking, like, I would say the best solution out of the gate is your jackhammer radishes, the daikons, to just start peeling open the top, and so that you can get some infiltration with water and compost extract. But I've never heard of compacted peat. Those are the only two scenarios I could kind of figure as how you would end up with that. But maybe he can expand on that.
Well, we're waiting for him to expand. Serena came in with a question. Are the yellow leaves with black spots on the watermelon plants a result of disease or nutrient deficiency? And how should I treat the soil accordingly?
All right. So, yeah, yellow leaves tends to be lack of nitrogen. Watermelons are definitely a nutrient pig. So I would say if you can get your hands on some really good compost and make an extract, that's the quickest way to begin to rescue. The black spots could potentially be an insect infestation. It could also be a fungal pressure. Something like a black spot. There's a bunch of them, crown rot. So again, what I'll always tell people to do as a rescue is you want three things. You want humic acid, because humic acid makes chemistry play nice. So if there's an imbalance somewhere or you've got a nutrient lockout, the humic acid is going to fix that. Second, hormone. You want a good water-soluble kelp, a kelp extract that you can add, because the kelp will provide a number of plant hormones, and also, more importantly, that has the trace minerals that help to deal with some of the more intricate plant processes that require those trace minerals. Like always when I do soil tests, first thing I do, well, I have a series of things I do, but trace minerals is up in the top 5. Like, do you have molybdenum, right? Where's your potassium levels? Well, potassium's a major, but where's copper? Where's zinc? Zinc can affect nitrogen release. So there's a lot of those intricacies within chemistry, so that kelp alleviates that. And last thing is a good biological blast. You do those three things, and you can pull plants out of the woods pretty quickly. That probably would have died if you didn't treat them this way. So hopefully that helps you.
And Perpetual got back. We are 2 to 5 meters below sea level. So this is in Europe, guys, by the way.
So you're 2 to 3 feet below sea level. Did you have what we call saltwater incursion? So the salt came in from the sea and bound up all of the peat. Is it high? Have you tested? Is it high sodium? Perpetual. We'll have to wait for him to get back to us. I've never done one of these like this where we're answering like and re-asking questions, but it's kind of fun.
That's cool. I like how it pops up too.
Right? Well, while we're waiting for him, we still got 15 minutes. Do you have to scoot, Christine, or can you stay till the end?
No, I'll it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
So one of the interesting conversations you and I had back when we first got together was best in class. So looking at all these different technologies and trying to understand, how to dovetail pieces of equipment, or which one is going to give you the most bang for the buck as far as the needs of the specific project. And that's when I introduced you to Ecosphere Sciences, which we have not gotten a proper demonstration for you yet. Hopefully in the near future, we will have the opportunity to get that piece of equipment down here. But that one is by far, in my mind, the best in class that I could find in the 15 years that I've been playing.
I can't recall if you told me that it was able to handle compostable tableware, the disposable.
Oh, it'll handle bones. You can throw a carcass.
Bones. Okay.
Yeah, you can throw a whole carcass in there. I mean,
and what about oils? Like just greasy foods, like from a vendor,
so the
hot dog vendor.
Yes, the interesting thing about the muncher process is that proteins and oils do not affect its ability to process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if you could dump a whole vat of friggin' vegetable oil in it without fucking things up. But if you were responsible and fed it in with other materials, then it will break them down into break them down or bind them to other pieces of the earth.
I mean, the process, the ECC, the ESS process.
Yep.
Sphere systems. Yeah. it as I was beginning to understand and learn how that technology worked, I always try to bring it back to like simple terms, right? And it's a wastewater treatment type of process, right? It's aerobic, right? But it's in solution. You're adding biology and the organic matter that otherwise, hey, it's going from toilet downstream to a wastewater treatment system. It bubbles, it aerates, and you can get, filtered water out of it. So I love the adaptation, of it, for specifically source separated organics, right? And the fact that it has a small footprint, it has the high capacity. I wish I could have tested it, at the stadium. But the fact that it was on a small footprint, high capacity, can you share, what that capacity, that daily capacity is?
Oh God, it depends on which unit. There's a unit.
Tell me your smallest unit.
Well, the smallest unit I tweaked. Well, no, it's not the smallest. The smallest unit is a bench top. All right. It's not a bench top. It's freestanding, 6 feet high, 3 feet by 3 feet. Right. That's the smallest. Up from there is the 5 ton a day, which is the demonstration unit. They have the capacity to build a 10 ton a day system. From there, it jumps to 25 ton a day. And then the 25 ton a day system couples. So you can add on another block to get to 100, 200, 300.
Right. It's modular.
It's modular. So, and actually the modules, when you have 2 25 ton units, you're actually saving one whole grinder system. So it's not only modular, it's more advanced. It works better.
And you just brought up grinder, that piece is a huge piece to the puzzle for doing large scale processing within a city, right? You're always going to have a pre-processing component to it. And that is basically for size reduction. So the grinder, from what I understand, yes, it pre-processes it. So it reduces its size and particle size for adding to the vat, the chamber, right? That's
it's all about, it's all about surface area.
Yeah.
And they actually have,
that's right, the surface area.
Right. It's all, they have 3 or 4 grinders and then 1 macerator. So we're talking about taking, anything and reducing it to something that is probably got to be like 200 micron or less.
Going from a Big Mac to a cracker.
I mean, a crumb, literally a crumb. Like a crumb. Yeah, it will fit through 200 microns. So,
yeah.
And that was in many ways one of the keys to his success. I mean, there was a lot of them: balancing the pH, monitoring the temperature right in the right sweet spot, aeration, agitation, recirculation, as well as decomposing or breaking down that matter to a very small particulate so that the bugs could do the job.
Right. I think the one thing on the ESS is you're immediately getting the liquid out of it, the biology that's in the liquid, but then you lose, your carbon, right? Your structure.
Actually, no, because the solids, I mean, the liquid has suspended solids, and those are super fine pieces of carbon that can go in and transport, like colonies of organisms into the soil.
Right.
There's also solids that you can pull out of it and pelletize. And I did a liquid solid separation with my equipment here in Oxnard, and I sent both of those in for soil food web analysis. The solids was better than the liquids, believe it or not, which is very surprising.
Well, and this is when you go back to like dissolved organic matter, right? The DOMs and the SOMs and the whatnot. But when we think of the need for mulch in our urban cities, right, our urban environments, right, where we need to cover the bare ground that is exposed under the canopy of our shade trees, right, that liquid wouldn't necessarily serve the function, of providing that layer of protection that has the solid organic matter that creates the home, where you would want to apply the liquid solution onto, add that biology too. So I think there's still, again, I'm going to go back to, it's not a one size fits all. It's definitely, it has its role to play from a volume processing standpoint. So we've got to always just be careful,
just to be clear, the muncher was never intended to take wood chips, right? Those are an ingredient that's added, but it's not designed to take green waste. It's designed to take
for food. It's for food. So that's a good distinction. That's a really good distinction to make.
And anytime
we've got to plan for it, right? If there's an institution that is like, oh my gosh, we just want to handle our food scraps, right? And you're done, but they didn't know about, well, we have all this landscaping and all these shade trees that need treatment. We need to bring in wood chips. If they don't understand that interface of how to apply it and what other materials, I think that's another knowledge gap that we need to do a better job as consultants,
Well, again, it's like application.
Yeah.
What are you applying it to? Oh, you want to use it on your shade tree.
You've got to find out. You've got to ask those questions.
We need to put down a layer of palm to absorb it. And we need to put down a layer of chips to hold the palm down.
Yeah.
And so then we come in and spray it. Now you have that interface with the soil.
Yeah.
The microbes have the palm to start chewing on, and the whole system works. But again, what is your application? What's
the end goal? What is the end goal? Yeah. And as a consultant, I think that's what people don't understand either is, and there's so much movement in these days, for tracking and metrics and reporting, because the law says we have to report, we have to meet certain targets. And now that conversation has taken a foothold and less about what we're talking about, right? Is what is the actual end goal? Well, yes, it's to reduce emissions, but we also have to manage our soils, and the whole conversation around conserving our urban soils, and it's taken a back seat, sadly. And I'm hoping that technologies like the ESS will hopefully open the door to have more of these types of conversations that will, check off more of the topics that need to be talked about in one sitting, right? Because it's a web. We're all interconnected in so many different ways. So
and that's why
I'm just grateful you introduced me to this technology so that I can understand, all right, here's its role, here's its place, but for any one institution, we've got to drill down, where would it be a good fit, and how do we want to use, what is the organics that's being generated? Would it fit would it be appropriate to, I don't know. It's a fascinating, topic to explore for sure.
Well, I'm excited to have you up to the Seed Fest and show you the box truck, because that's the missing piece.
I'm excited.
Yeah, that's coming up not
November,
this week, next week.
Next week. Oh, yeah. Okay. Send me more info. I got to get it on my calendar.
Yeah. So you want to speak on Thursday, correct?
Yes.
All right. So I finally got the schedule from Eric this morning. And so I'm going to print it out, and then all the blank spots, I'll text you and say, hey, look, I got openings for these times on Thursday. You tell me which time slot.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, let's get back to Perpetual here. Lily wanted me to make sure you understand that his 2 to 5 meters is 6 to 15 feet deep. And then he said oxidization and drought years, we are not bagging or talking bogs, but meta regions that were dug out in the 19th and 20th century and pumped out of surface water. Salt creeping up is an issue for agriculture, but not a serious issue here. But water levels are managed. It's a dairy region, so levels are low enough to mow mechanically.
So in other words, the fields aren't squishy. So it's all the roots, dude. If you get roots in the ground, the roots will decompact the soil. But in order to have roots or deep roots, you have to have solar panels up top that can collect the sun to help grow those roots to penetrate deeper down into that compaction. So I would say you're talking all about roots. You're talking about using compost extracts or dissolved organic matter. Those are going to be your critical things. If you need to jumpstart it, you're going to want to use like a deep tiner. So a tine is a little spike that's on a piece of equipment that rolls behind a tractor and punches a hole in the ground. And then with that hole, now you'll start to get water infiltration. You can get the biological installation or infiltration. And then the roots will chase down those holes. And the other thing is worms, dude. And if you can do a couple biological applications, I promise you the worms will come back, and they're going to be the backbone of that decompaction. But it's like if you're heavily agriculturally managing that and cutting it off constantly, then you're fighting compaction. Both the fact the roots can't penetrate because you're cutting the top off, you're driving equipment over it that's helping the compaction, and you don't have the biology because it's compacted. So you have to decompact, get the biology, get the roots, and you can pretty much turn anything around. I mean, I did a field in Connecticut that was like just horrid. Like it was so compacted. It's like California soils, the crust. It was crusted down about 2 feet. And we were able to do it with 3 applications, 2 biologicals and 1 food source, and then overseeding. And then when I left there, I could take my finger and stick it down about 2 to 3 inches without a lot of pressure. So I know it can be done, but it's a method, it's a process. It's not just shoot it with a gun and call it a day.
No shotguns, guys. No shotguns. Okay.
Now the bullet will bounce back and hurt you.
Exactly. Well, we're at basically the 2 hours. So what's going on, guys? Do you
That's pose cue. Like, all right, come on, Dad.
time for a walk, Dad. But you just were talking about Christine's going to be at one of your events, so
yes,
that's fantastic.
Yes, so I posted up on Instagram the seed event. It's Heirloom Seed Fest. Baker Creek Seeds is the host, and it looks like it's going to be a blast. It's actually grown quite a bit the last couple weeks. They created another stage because there was so much demand for speakers. They're calling it the soil and compost stage. So there's a main stage, there's a local speaker stage, and now there's the soil and compost stage. There'll be all kinds of guests rotating in and out. There'll be giveaways. There's going to be some raffles. It's a big event. I'm being told that anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 people a day. That's a pretty big event. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10th, 11th, and 12th at Ventura County Fairgrounds. Not this week, next week. And Christine's coming up to speak on Thursday, which I'm excited about. And then there'll be another event for people local out here in California on November 1st at Peach Hill. This one's going to be more probably directed at professionals, although I will have a little bit of wiggle room if there was someone that was really interested in getting up there. But then we'll be doing other homeowner-based or educational-based open houses in the future as we get comfortable with it.
Cool. Okay, guys, as for the channel, Wednesday, Andy and I are on again, and I'm not sure who I'm going to have or if I'm going to have a guest on Friday. So stay tuned for that. Guys, last words, and we'll peace out.
All right, Perpetual, one thing, raise the mower. I don't care if you have to weld on a little extensions. Get that grass to 5 to 6 inches tall. That's really important, and it'll look good from far away. You don't need to maintain a low grow. So hopefully that helps you. Christina, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I'm very grateful, to be included in this conversation.
And I think we have more conversations to come in the future. I'm really looking forward to, infecting LA market, both the residential as well.
We need it. We need that kind of infection.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. A knowledge infection. Yeah.
And Ken, thank you as always.
You need to be inoculated with all of this.
Yeah.
Inoculation, exactly. Thanks as always,
Appreciate
Ken,
it.
for all the work you do behind the scenes.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the Labor Day and all of your work. And everybody else out there that was listening, appreciate it.
Okay, guys.
Take care.
Bye.